All right, it is 1 o'clock here in Boston and time to get started. Hi, and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Dion McCormick, no relation, our Supreme Solutions Engineer and founder of Giant Killer Training. Today, Dion is going to go over, I believe, a card type interface, a two-side card interface, actually. Something that's really cool, something that I think you'll enjoy using in your projects. We're also here, of course, to answer your questions, and you could type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. You could also send them to us at guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. All right, so let us get started. Hello, Dion, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hey there. How are you doing today, Dave?
I'm doing great, thanks. I'm going to go ahead and make you the
Cool.
presenter.
Will do.
And there
Dun,
is your screen.
dun. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Dave. Appreciate that. Hey, everybody. Thank you for taking time to spend it with us. And again, our focus here is on helping you any way we can. So make sure to go to your questions area and add any questions you have into the question. And we'll be reviewing that and doing our best to answer it from there. Along with that, also remember you can send information to guides at alphasoftware.com. And that is our email address. We try to get to as many as those possible. We include those into our weekly webinar, and it really helps us out from there. And I got a couple this morning. I hadn't had a chance to follow up on those, but we'll look into those and get some responses back as soon as possible. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We are still coming down from the DevCon, just an amazing event. A lot of cool stuff showed off. And in fact, we're starting to see some of that stuff starting to trickle into the pre-release. So what we're going to do today is, beyond answering your questions, is start introducing you to some really cool new user interface tools that are being included into the alpha development environment you'll be able to use on your implementation. Now, what I'm going to show you today was kind of the first version of it, and they're actually already adding newer and better versions to it. We'll be covering those in the next few weeks. But again, it's about creating very dynamic, powerful user interfaces that leverage the screen real estate and make it also sort of a seamless experience for the user. So before, in the early days, you'd have page by page by page. Now we have one-page apps. And the more you can do where things just kind of reconfigure themselves to present whatever the most current need is from the user interface with the user, or what the user would like to see, is better. So these are some really nice, cool capabilities that are easy to implement, easy to add to your solution, and make it look much more modern, and also more importantly, make it look just as slick as you can get it. And the other nice thing is that uses and leverages a lot of HTML and CSS, so that you can use a lot of styling techniques with these new tools to make it look and act exactly the way you want it from there. So today we're going to focus on, well, actually, before I go into there, I also have a couple other quick, like, hey, this is some cool stuff coming down the road. So let's go ahead and go into the pre-release notes that are up on, and I'm going to go ahead and copy those real quick, put it into the chat window in case you want to go there directly. Dynamite. But a couple, they're actually, the new pre-releases are available. There's some really cool new capabilities. One that I want to highlight first and foremost, which has been in development for some time. I'm not sure how long, but it's been a long development cycle, which is our universal installer. Now, the universal installer is really neat because it's a single installer that can install everything you need: the developer version, the application standalone server, this application server for IIS, and the runtime. And before, you needed to download the different installers and keep them and everything else. But this is really cool because you download it once and you're good to go. And there's actually a second aspect of it. First is you can install any product you want. But the other cooler aspect is that you don't have to keep downloading installers. Before, when you needed to upgrade, say, an app server, you'd go up to the releases, you download that current installer for that, load it on your machine and do the installation. Now you don't need to do that. And so it's really, really powerful. It simplifies sort of the DevOps maintenance of your environments. and you can be confident in terms of how it's going to install. And so that's released. It's now available in here for you to check out for there. There's some description on that information, and it really also really accelerates the installation of a product too. That means not only is it simpler, it's a single installer, but it also operates faster, and it also gives you the ability to install either the nightly build or the production release wherever you go. So if you want to play around on that, that's pretty cool. The neat thing is you don't need to download it every time. You just download the install the installer once, and then you're good to go from there. Now, there may be situations where you don't have access to the internet. Maybe it's a secure environment that reduces your connectivity out the world, because the universal installer basically calls out and gets the latest files from Alpha. So you're always guaranteed to have the most current information when you do the installation. But if you don't have that capability, there is a method which you can call, or you can create what's called an offline installer. So you can actually generate something that you can then put onto a USB stick and then go onto a server or do something like that. Because our clients have a wide range of needs, and some are much higher security environments, so they don't allow internet connections and other things for their internal apps. So this is a way to do there. So it's really well thought out, easier, simpler, faster, more flexible, and still maintains the ability to install it wherever you want it to go. So check that out. Very, very cool. A couple other quick things that I want to cover real quick on the new pre-release. There's a lot of little neat, small little changes, but there's a couple big changes that are coming. And we're going to cover those in the future. One, which I think is really powerful because it continues to mature the list control. You can basically freeze columns on lists now. Like, this is a standard technique you'll see on spreadsheets where you'll have one or more frozen columns, and then when you do the essentially the zoom over or move it over, you want to keep that one column the same, but then change the other ones, including the header and the data. So that's a new capability. We'll cover that in a little more detail. Some more enhancements on the list control, which are really cool. But also, there are the new containers, the card navigator, card header, and card footer container types. And again, we're going to start looking at those in more depth next week. The demonstration today is kind of a precursor for that, but that's really neat because you can create these really cool interfaces and very powerful interface very simply, and you'll see a little bit of that today. So a lot of neat stuff in the pre-release. Again, this is pre-release, or what we're calling the nightly build. So feel free to play with it, but again, be careful about using it in production till it comes out in a production release. But I've been noticing the production releases have been happening a lot sooner. There's been less gap between them. So the cool thing about that is we're seeing the newer features roll into production at a much quicker pace than we had in the past. And I think that will continue as the team moves forward. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump over into my demonstration here. And again, we're going to be focusing on user interface techniques. Again, huge amount of power on Alpha to talk to databases and edit database information, manage information connectivity to APIs, etc. But today we're going to focus on a user interface element. And in that case, it's called, well, it's part of the new containers, but it's called the two-sided card. So it's a little different. We're going to talk about the containers next time, but this time I'm going to talk about a template that was built into Alpha recently that you can take advantage of to create a really cool 3D card effect. So let's go ahead and jump into our development environment. Dave, just make sure our audio, video is coming through okay. No problems there.
Okay.
Outstanding. Okay, so I've already pre-created a little UX here. It doesn't do anything yet. And what we want to do is create what's called a two-sided card. So you'll see it's really straightforward. You can actually create it in two ways. First, we can use a Viewbox control, or we can use a freeform layout. And a freeform layout is cool. A freeform layout is just a container that can, or a control, excuse me, that can put in any kind of HTML you want. Really neat. I use that a lot to take external HTML, encapsulate it, and put it into a container or a little control that's on my interface. I'm going to show the view box, and we can talk a little bit more about that, but I'm going to go here to my add control, start typing in. Again, this is a newer feature to speed up your development process. You don't have to go digging around. So I'm adding it, and I'll go Viewbox card. Now, I'm going to add that to my interface. And I have my Viewbox that is available from there. And I'll go ahead and say fill the container. So a Viewbox is really neat. We've talked about it a lot. It's a very flexible control that allows you to basically merge data with HTML and CSS. And it has a lot of built-in functionality to make that very dynamic, to add action to it, to integrate with it. We're going to use it very simple today. We're just going to include some HTML and play with the HTML. So I'm going to go into my Viewbox. This will open up my editor. Again, a lot of information. And again, if you want a lot of details on this, you can click here and we have lots of documentation that's available for you to review from there. You can also load a sample Viewbox to get some information on that. A lot of examples are out there. Now, the first thing is data source. I'm going to make this a static HTML. When you're using Viewboxes, you actually have two selections. You can either use HTML static, or you can use data, whichever you want from that standpoint. Now, static, it's just static HTML. It's just a way to take some HTML, put it on the screen. Very similar to what I mentioned earlier in terms of the freeform. If you include data, then what you can do is connect this to a data source, whether it be a list, backend database, JSON, JavaScript, whatever, custom code. So you can then connect it and then make information within the Viewbox dynamic. I'm going to keep it simple today. I'm really focusing just on how to use the new two-panel card. But this is really neat because you can take these cool new templates and do some really fancy things with it. But let's keep it simple today. So I'm there. So we have, if we look at the Viewbox, we have items. These are elements that are going to be in there, properties, etc. But we're going to go over here to Viewbox layout. And this is basically just HTML. So I can go in here and I can, just as you can notice, I'm starting to type some HTML and I put that in there and we'll put some R, B/B. There we go. So you can just put any HTML. If you've defined it as a data-driven one, you can insert items here. We don't have any items and things, but you have a lot of flexibility. But all this does is render some HTML. So as I go there, click here, and Viewboxes are very fast because they're lightweight controls. They don't take a lot of space and they run very quickly, very compact, and very speedy. So you'll see, here's my Viewbox. It's taking up this whole area here, and I just have that HTML here. So if you need to put some HTML on your page for some reason, feel free to use that as a nice little technique. That's all you do is you open up a Viewbox, put it in there. And again, Viewboxes are very efficient, so you don't have to worry about like a list control or something, which is going to include a lot more weight into your user interface. You can keep it simple there. Now, I'm going to go back into my Viewbox and I want to explore a little bit more about this. One of the cool things is that Alpha included a whole bunch of pre-made templates that you can use for your Viewboxes and other things here. So we have the infamous or famous cat. So I can grab something like here. Let's say I want that. Let's go ahead and grab that. It's got some buttons. Click some OK. You'll notice that it installed the HTML, but it also put some CSS in there that's in there. So the Viewbox layout. So now when I go back into working preview, you'll see there is our, it's looking a little different. I think I have to do it in live preview to get everything to work on that. But basically it's included that HTML in here, so you're in good shape in how to do it. So that's a nice way to include some pre-made HTML into it. Now, I'm using that pre-made, but I can bring in any HTML I want. So if I have a third-party designer that's created a neat little HTML thing, I can bring in there the HTML, I can bring in the CSS. I'm going to get rid of this for now, and including any JavaScript that's needed from there. So we can get rid of all this stuff here. So really cool. Use it. It's really handy for kind of integrating existing off-the-shelf HTML. Now, let's go ahead and look at what our target is for today with a really cool new capability. So let's go ahead and insert a layout. We're going to load a layout. I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom. So there, and you'll notice we have a new one here called the two-sided card template. Do note the Internet Explorer, which luckily is slowly but going away. although there are certain people that are still using it. I think the Edge browser is really starting to knock it out, and they're starting to try and aggressively move everybody over onto that, which is good because it's based on the same Chrome engine as Chrome. So that's kind of cool there. But they give you a little heads up just in case you have older school people who have Internet Explorer, they might not see certain elements of this working. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Now this one's a special one. It's going to ask me some information about width and height. I'm going to actually increase that to say 4 inches and 3 inches. Just make it a little bigger here. We're giving it a unique ID, but also you can set what the background colors and button icons and things like that. So you can actually modify this template even before it's inserted into your HTML area. Once it's in there, you can continue to modify it, but this is a nice way to just kind of instantly get what you're looking for. So you can see that it's created a set of HTML for me. It's really a series of divs with some information associated with it. And it's also added a whole series of CSS that is used by that. So this allows, so you don't have to worry about kind of all that, creating the CSS, etc. They just do that for you. So now I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to click Save. And we'll do a working preview. So in a moment, after rendered, we now have our view box, and inside there, given the size I see, we have a card here. But notice we have a little icon here. Watch when I click on that icon, you get a very cool 3D effect to flip the content. Yeah, it's really neat. And what's nice is that, and I'll show you in a moment, that you'll notice I'm seeing this content, which is the front of the card. But then when I flip it over, I see the content on the back of the card. So now I can essentially double my screen real estate space with a very nice way to allow the user to see it. So maybe, and I'll talk about this, the front is maybe a summary, then I want to see details I can do over here. So that's a really simple way for you to add a neat little interface and change it. You can change the coloring and the backgrounds and all that. Everything is tailorable by what you would like to see. And when we get into the new containers, it actually makes it a lot easier down the road. But let's go ahead and explore this a little bit more. Let's go ahead and look and see what's going on here. So first we have the front of it, which says put card contents front here, and our little button. And then when I do that, it then flips the card over and shows me my second level of content. And the size of that was dictated when I created it. I told it what size and width I wanted it to be. You know, I always change that later. So let's go back into design and look at this a little bit more. The reality is what we're doing is just using some really cool CSS tricks to be able to do this. CSS has a whole bunch of new capabilities in terms of layout and animations and other things like that. It's really cool. It's called a transform, way beyond my pay grade. I got to tell you, this stuff starts getting, you know, CSS is amazing. It's incredibly powerful, but it's good if you really know it. It's kind of one of those things that, you know, and luckily you don't have to know a lot of it. We take care of a lot of the work for you. But again, if you get this to a third-party designer, they'll be able to understand it. They can tweak it very readily because they have all the tools and everything else to do that. So it's all built into it. So basically this animation effect is being done through cool, what are called CSS transforms, which are been added recently. I don't know when, but it's been a little while, that allow you to do more with CSS from that standpoint. But the heart of it is in our layout, because this is basically showing our information. So you'll notice we have a high-level card information, and then you have content area, and then you'll notice in the content area, you have an area called front and an area called back. So these two, I think it's this one right here. So these two is where you're going to focus your energy. So you'll notice on our front one here, it's got a class name. Leave that be because that's how CSS identifies it to do what they need to do. But you'll notice right here, there's background colors. So you can actually insert a background color and change that color if you want to right here. Then you'll notice we have an area here that says class inner, but here is the div with put card contents front here, and then put card contents back here. So now I can just go in and say, okay, hello, webinar. Thanks for flipping the card. Okay, so this is where you want to focus this area here. that kind of is where you're going to put your content. I'm going to show you a couple cool tricks you can do on that too. So you got a working preview. And then in my working preview, now you notice the new text is showing up here and the text is showing up here. Now, as we mentioned, a Viewbox can be data driven. So if I wanted to, I could connect this to a data source and then put information in here that is data driven, which is cool. I'm not going to do it today. It's really beyond the scope of our discussion. I really just want to focus on this. But I want to show you another cool trick that I use a lot that I think you'll find useful. But that said, I could go back to data source, change that, and then in my layout, I could actually insert the fields from that data source so that live data, maybe it's a callback to get information about a customer and you want to display that customer information in a really cool card metaphor. You can do that very easily here. And again, inside this div, you can put any kind of HTML or a thing you want. So I could go ahead and just change this. And now I've got, and notice we have a full HTML editor built into it. We click OK and do a quick working preview, and that HTML will show up. Only take a moment to do that. Okay, so notice it's hello webinar, but it's got a bolded effect here. Okay, now let's say we have something a little bit more complicated. Let's say we want to put inside that card a form or something like that. Well, you could go in and handcraft the form here, but that's not the alpha way. We don't want to spend that much time on it. So what's cool is I'm going to change this now. I'm going to move away from a view box because I want to show you this other technique to it. So I'm basically going to copy this. So we've already done all the work to get here. Come on, let's copy it. Okay. And I'm going to delete this for now. And I'm just going to put in, just to show you it also works on my other technique, I'm going to go over here to my containers and I'm going to put in a freeform layout. I'm going to go in my freeform layout. I'm going to insert my template. So it's very similar to what I did before. I'll leave that information to a large degree. And then I'm going to copy, I'm just going to paste my stuff there and we're good to go. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a working preview. Now it'll have a little different sizing because I didn't adjust the sizing. I might not have, we'll see. But we should see essentially the same concept here. Ooh, interesting. I wonder why it's not doing that. I must have done something wrong. Let me go ahead and just, since I think I might have, because I copied and pasted, so we'll just go back, do that real quick. I think it has a little different animal. And we'll go back into here, do it. Now the animation should reappear. We'll see in a moment. There we go. So there must be a slight difference between the two. I think it's because that template is a little different inside of Viewbox from the other one. But that said, we're still here. It's back to the original content. But what I want to show you is that I could go in and do all my HTML, or I could do something pretty cool. And I want to show you what this is. I'm going to first add a new panel card here. I'm in a panel layout, so I can have multiple panel cards. So I'm going to add a panel by just right-clicking on the end panel card, saying panel card. And I'm going to actually call this panel card PC hidden, because I'm going to put stuff in there that I don't want the person to see. It's kind of a common technique I use is I'll create a panel card in here. I'll centralize all my hidden stuff so it's there, but it's kind of hidden from the user. So I'm going to say it's a 40%, and I'm going to dock it to collapse after. So basically all I'm doing right here is saying, hey, when you show this, don't show the panel card, go ahead and collapse it. Normally I would use that to say show it dynamically, but in this case I'm just permanently kind of hiding it by using that technique there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a little form. So I'm going to add a control. I'll say it's a text box. I'll go name, first, last, middle, initial. Okay. So I'm just creating 3 little boxes there. This could be data bound in there. And then I'm going to take these right here and I'm going to use a container and I'm going to surround it with a container. Now I'm going to surround it with a very cool container, which is called the Injectable content container. and I'll speak a little bit more. It's a very powerful concept because it really allows you to keep to using simple alpha techniques for building forms and other stuff, but be able to integrate it easily with HTML, which you'll see in a moment. So I'm going to go there, and it's injectable content. Now, the interesting thing about injectable content is that by default, it's hidden. So anything inside that normally is hidden. So if I were to just kind of go up here and move it up into my other panel card, and again, I could do that, although I like to centralize my hidden stuff into a specific panel card. It's just a technique I use. But now if I go to working preview, you should see the card, but you'll notice my fields for my form, those 3 text fields, are hidden. The injectable content is here, but it's not visible to the user. So that's kind of neat. You can just put it in there and have it available. But what I want to do is actually use it with the user. So I'm going to go ahead, and here's the injectable content. I can put anything I want in there, including buttons, etc. Actually, let's go ahead and add a button here just to kind of show you that. So we'll add in a button, and I'll say save. Okay. So I've got my, essentially my container with my information into it. Actually, to make sure I don't oversize it, I'm just going to have the first 2 there. And again, this could be data bound. It could be populated from a list. You never know. Up to you. So now that I have that, I'm going to return back to my freeform container. And this is one of the cool things about it. Oh, wait a minute. Is it the injectable I put there? Oh, I did it a little differently. That's what. I went off track. I'm sorry, guys. Injectable content is useful, like when you have a control bar and other pieces to do disclosures. I'm going to use a little different technique, and this depends on a capability built into the free form. So sorry about that. I'm just going to move these down. I knew I wanted the hidden for a reason. And I'll get rid of the injectable. We'll do a more detail on the injectable later. What I'm going to do is go to these here, and I'm going to go ahead and tell them that they're hidden, and I'll explain in a minute why. So even though they're hidden, I'm still marking them as hidden. Now I'm going to go to my freeform container here, and you'll notice something very cool. On the left-hand side are any of my controls in my UX that I have hidden. And you'll see they have little curly braces. Basically, it's saying, here is a pointer to that control. And it doesn't have to be text. It can be actually a control. So now I can go in here into that front of that card here, and I can say, you know what? I'm going to put in my first name, and I'm going to put a BR, and then I'm going to put in my last name. So what's going to happen is on the fly, when this gets rendered, it's going to go and say, oh, I need to put first here. What is first? Oh, it's a text box, and I can put that inside and it inserts it in the HTML there. So let's go ahead and make sure that worked properly. Injectable content's sort of the same thing, but it takes all that container and puts it in one. And it's used a little differently. So that's why I got off track there. So we'll go in here, and now you'll see we have our little 2 things there. And I didn't have to actually lay out those. So if I go, oh, you know what? I need to, and you know what? First, let's go into properties, and I'm going to make this compact so it's a little nicer. Let's look at that real quick. Again, we're using the alpha style to take care of all that work for me. So you'll notice now I have 2 little smaller, everything's a little smaller. Now you go, oh wait, there's no lettering or anything like that. So let's go to my controls. Let's go to my first here. And this is the only tricky part, is that we're actually showing the label. We're saying position left, but the way the hidden controls is it just puts the control in there, not the label. So I can just go in here and just use a combination. I can say first, and I'm putting in a colon. So this is static text here. And I can go last and put it in there. And now I can go back in, and now I can start building a nice looking form that's a combination of alpha. And the cool thing about it is that all the regular stuff for alpha, so John Doe, and if I have a button, I click the button, then it's going to treat those as regular text boxes that may be data bound, or it could be read on the back end with an e.date submitted. So think of this as kind of blending the best of 2 worlds. The first world, which is it's really easy to build forms with alpha because you just drag the controls over there, set them up, link them to the database, do whatever you need to do, and you're done. but sometimes you don't have the control over the look and feel to make it look good. So that's where you can start using techniques such as this template concept, or, and you'll see soon, we have these new containers that also allow you to do those really cool things there. So let's go ahead and show you also, and I didn't show this, is I can go in here. And again, Alpha takes care of all the work for you. So I can load this up. I can go John Doe, then, flip it over. Notice it's not missing there. So maybe this is like more details, to add more details to your form. Thus, you can compact your form into a much smaller space, and it's, it basically handles that. Like, let's say we want to go ahead and just go into this here. We'll go back to the back side of it, and I'm just going to highlight my text there, and I'm going to put in my button, and we'll go into working preview. And the button will work just the same as it does if you had visible or not. But you'll notice now I go here and there's my button. So you can kind of insert controls where you need there. And so this is just kind of a quick demonstration of how these newer user interface techniques allow you to do much more powerful. And you're going to really enjoy the containers because we've taken this and kind of put it on steroids. And so you'll see the new capabilities there as we show it. But we're really trying to make sure that you can create these interfaces that are just super powerful, super nice looking, achieve really kind of like your users are like, wow, how'd you do that? That's so cool. How long did it take you to write that? You can of course lie, which would be valid, and say, oh, it took hours, but up to you. I'll leave that up to you from there. But we're really having fun with these. This is sort of the genesis starting point for a lot more capabilities like this. And you'll see more and more of that come out there, because what's kind of nice is we're piggybacking on the power of CSS, the power of our team's understanding of how to use that and incorporate it with Alpha solutions. And you're going to have a lot of fun with it, I can guarantee you, because you can just do really cool. I like these. One of the cool things I can use these for, like KPI indicators. So maybe on the front, it has like a little chart or a graph or a graphic. And then I go on the back, and on the back, maybe it has a deal. Think of it as like a baseball card where you have a picture of the player here. And then when you click on it, on the back of that, you have their statistics. I'm sure there's a few people in our audience that collected baseball cards, but that's kind of that card flip metaphor. But it's really valid because people are very intuitive about understanding, here's a summary of data, and now I want the details to go here, and then you'll see some more details that are associated with that. So that is the two-carded. It's in, that is actually in the production release, if I'm not mistaken. I go back over here. If I go into the release notes, this is actually production, but we'll see. The newer container stuff is not. That's coming. Card. Let's see. Let's go down. Yep, it's in the production release under two-sided card layout. So you can feel free to start using this with the latest production release. The newer containers we'll cover soon in pre-release, but they should be rolled into production fairly quickly, along with all the other cool new stuff here. So pretty neat, pretty neat. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn that back over to Dave, see if you have any questions or.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So I don't see questions here on what you just covered, although that might come in a bit, but I do have some general questions, which I would like to get to.
Yes.
One is, some are harder than others. I'll do a hard one in a minute, but let's just.
They've been saving up these questions, haven't they?
Wait, now here's a good one, because this is near and dear to your heart. Can you please enlighten us a bit about Bootstrap to simplify CSS application?
Yeah. Okay.
No, I did
So
not pose this question. This is a real question from a real fan.
yeah, I know. Me and Demorik from Austin, Texas, asked that one. Okay. So Bootstrap is a HTML and CSS framework, and you can find out a lot of information about it. It was actually built. Bootstrap, let's see, let's go here. Okay, so it's under Get Bootstrap. It was actually generated, I believe it was Twitter put it together. They were like going, wait a minute, everybody rolls their own user interfaces, their own CSS and everything else. There were templates on the market, but let's create a basic responsive sort of framework with a methodology that's associated with it. And that then allows people to have like that 80% of the CSS stuff kind of done so they can layer it on top of it. So it's grown really, really popular because it allowed CSS designers to essentially have this framework to work on top of. They really were focused back to styling because Bootstrap does a lot of plumbing kind of stuff, layouts on the screen and other elements. There's a whole Bootstrap, there's tons of documentation about it. But the really neat things about it is that now that you have Bootstrap, many people are now building themes. So they have their own themes here. These are your standard themes, but then you can go to ThemeForce and other people there. And basically what they're doing is they're taking the Bootstrap framework and then building on top of it. Now, the cool thing about that is that it is basically a free and open Bootstrap, and it's currently 4.5.3. So you can do one of two things. You can either download all the CSS and everything else that comes with it, basically the library, or you can put links into your A5W pages or into the header of a UX, and it's available, which is really cool because then you don't have to put a bunch of stuff in your project. It's being dynamically loaded through the internet when you run. Although if you use a third-party theme, they may require you to download a lot of assets versus hitting theirs, so you may still be in that situation there. But the basic Bootstrap information, the JavaScript, notice it's a combination of JavaScript and then, where is it? It's over here, and the CSS is built into it. So the benefit of it, it allows you to very quickly kind of do some very sophisticated user interfaces with less work. So it's got a lot of popularity out there. So Alpha is Bootstrap compatible, meaning you can incorporate Bootstrap into your applications. And the way you do that is twofold, is either, like for instance, I'll grab this over here just as an example. I'm gonna go ahead and let's see if I can copy this. I wonder if I can copy that. There it is. Okay, so I'm gonna grab this here. Okay, I'm going to copy that. And this is on the fly. So if it blows up, it's been a while. So go ahead and put a UX component, put a UX, put it on there. Now, this isn't a replacement for Alpha standard themes. Those take care of all the controls, but you can put some cool stuff in there. So first thing, I've got this UX here. Now, what this will be delivered in an A5W page when it gets shown to the user. Either you create it yourself or it does it within it. So I can go here to properties and I can go and find what's called the head section tags. And I go in here and I paste it here. So what will happen is when Alpha generates this UX inside of a page, it will insert this information into the header of that page. So thus taking care of allowing the page to understand where to go get the information, because the page needs to load this CSS in, and then anything that uses those CSS classes will say, oh yeah, thank you, I've got that information, I'm going. And they've done a lot of optimizations, so it doesn't take a whole lot to for them to, I mean, it's a very small amount of code that comes down, and once it's there, it does a lot of caching, so you're not going to see a big performance hit. But now that I've got that on this UX, so let's go ahead and save there and say, oh, I don't have any controls. Let me go ahead and just put a control on here. Now that I've got that on my page, and if it's working there, I'll go Bootstrap. I can go back into Bootstrap, and here's some examples. And I wonder if I got a good example I can change here. Let's grab this one here. Okay. I wonder if I can just grab the code off it. No, it's gonna make me do that there. But I can take how these, like, you know, you see this has nice little page that's in there, this sign in page here. And it has all those nice pieces to it. I'm trying to think, I don't know, let's see, let's try this. I'm gonna do one other thing. I'm not gonna spend too much more time on this. Snippet. Let me see if I can just find a snippet to put it on there, just to show you how it works. There's some free code, and there's a lot of little cool snippets that you can use on stuff. Let's go ahead and grab something. What the heck? Let's grab that, see what that looks like. Okay, so here's the HTML. So that's the HTML. So I'll grab this HTML. I'm going to go over here to here. I'm going to go ahead and grab that. Remember, I've got that freeform layout, which is just an HTML container. Paste it there. Now, this is requiring some CSS because they've styled the CSS there. So remember, Bootstrap is a frame, but on top of it, people will put their own stuff. So what I'm going to do is go into properties here, and I'm going to go to CSS, and I'm going to go to local local CSS definitions. I'm going to paste it in there. So now it's part of it. So by doing that, it basically includes that CSS in the page. So let's do the working preview. We'll see. I think it's going to be too small because I have to make that area much larger, but let's see what it looks like here. Okay. So, it's not laid out perfectly. I'd have to do some checks to it, but, it's basically rendering, the CSS and HTML. It's a trial and error process. Start with something very simple and kind of build off there. But as you can see, you have a nice little header name there, title, information, and this is a little bit more of a complex one. Let's see what happens. Let's go into controls and let's make this 100% width and see if that changes it. I'm not sure, but that's the concept. So now the cool thing about it is that there's a whole bunch beyond that. You can do whole web pages, but there's little snippets and there's little pieces there. Yeah, this isn't coming out exactly how I want it to, but it at least opens up the ability to use Bootstrap items in your alpha solutions. So again, Bootstrap is just a industry standard free sort of framework. People build on top of it so that they have a common set of capabilities. You can bring that into your application. Actually, you know what? Let's try this. Maybe let me go and do a live preview. That may render a little nicer. Sometimes working preview isn't as nice, but then you can use a lot of really cool off-the-shelf Bootstrap stuff in your application, sort of like we did with that card, to be able to style your application and add more pizzazz to it. We'll see if this actually worked. Sometimes working preview isn't as nice as live preview. We'll see. I don't know. We'll know in a moment. There. Oh yeah, it is. Okay. So now you're seeing it's rendering the way it's supposed to render.
Wow, not bad at all. Yeah.
Yeah. So now I can go back in here, go into my freeform here, and then again modify. It's using these kind of pre-made classes and other things like here. This is what you see is this is a directive, this div class row and div class column mid. This is saying how to lay it out on the page, and this is Bootstrap stuff. My guess is this is their CSS they put together. But remember, I'm in a freeform read. I could grab a Viewbox and then take that HTML and merge it dynamically with data at runtime. So I could actually make, like, for instance, the headers be data driven or the footers to be data driven or the content. So there's a lot of flexibility. But again, it's another tool to help you style your apps, add some pizzazz to it. As you can see, it's not, to get some nice looking interfaces, you basically, in your header, again, you got to make sure in your head section tab, you point and load this information in here, because that basically puts the base framework classes in your page, and then you can add it from there. Then you can add your own CSS, third-party CSS, etc. So I hope that helps point you in the direction a little bit more.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Dion. So I've got a quick question and then a longer question. We'll start with a quick question, and it just has to do with when you're in a list control, you have the ability to make it a freeform list versus a columnar list. And so if you haven't done this a couple times, sometimes it's easy to forget. How do I switch that columnar list into a freeform list? And I was hoping you could kind of show us where that property is.
Yeah, no problem at all. So let's go ahead and put in a panel layout. I always like to do that. I haven't gotten the instance. I got a new VM here. I don't have my code set up there. Okay, so we'll go ahead and put in a list control. So you go through all the other processes the same. I'm going to skip the quick start. I'm going to make it the full thing. Make sure my properties are compact. Go back to controls. Go into customers. I'll make this a simple data-driven one. So I'll go SQL, get it from table name, customers, do some field lists. And by default, when you first create it, it's going to default to the columnar layout there. So here are my fields. Here's my list layout. So we'll go ahead and go here and save that is list view styles. And we'll do a quick working preview once that saves. There you go. So this is a standard kind of grid-like interface, very flexible from there. Now you don't have to use a grid with lists. Lists are super powerful. So I'm going to go back into a list control here, and I'm going to go to the list properties. So I'm going to the list property. Data source is where it's getting the information, if it's paginated, things along those lines. The fields tell you from that data source what comes back. This is where you can do things like display formats, styling, everything else from there. This is cool. Decode value is it does a lookup. So you can look up like if it's a parent, a foreign key relationship, you can do cool stuff there. Layouts, how you lay it out. But notice this is it's kind of a grid format. So you go to list properties and I want you to scroll down till you get to the layout type. So where you set the layout type for a list is here for layout type. And you'll notice it's column. So if I want to change that, I can click here and then select freeform. Now, what it will do is it kind of recreates the layout. So you'll have to kind of lay it, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But as you notice, we can also do Kanban, the newer charting capabilities coming out soon, mapping, custom, etc. Now, what I highly suggest you do is that if you've got this kind of working, you're going, oh, I want to experiment with my a freeform layout, you can use another technique. Instead of just saying, okay, freeform, blowing it away and recreating it, you can sit here and say multiple layouts. And now I have multiple layouts. I've got my default one, which is type column. I can now add a new one, which I'll call freeform. You can call it anything you want, select that type. And now I have a second freeform name here, or freeform layout here. I can now go into my list layout. When I select freeform, I go to list layout. I go over here and down below is where I actually say which one I'm editing. So we have our default layout, which is columns, but now I can go to freeform and now I have my freeform editor. I can just start putting stuff in here. And my styling, I can actually go into my cool templates. Notice I've got my different templates here, which are like mobile-oriented templates. I can actually even click here for more templates, and that'll bring up our modern one, including our card one. So let's just grab that for giggles here. Okay, so that'll overwrite. And then what I'm gonna do is gonna go here on the front of it. I'm gonna put in company name. And then, so basically now I can do it. Now the reason I did that is that now if I go, oh, you know what, I don't like that after all, I want to use my default one, which is the columnar one, then you're good to go. You haven't registered. I mean, another option is to make a copy of your UX, do these edits, and then restore it. Up to you. But there's a really powerful capability is that I can actually, on the fly, the user can switch between layouts. So they could be seeing it in columnar for one reason, then you can click a button, and on the fly, Alpha can display that other layout, which is kind of cool, for instance, with Kanban, because you can say, here's my normal list. And now when I go and put in the Kanban, you can show the Kanban from there. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my multiple layouts here. I'm going to click freeform and make that the default. So now when I run this, it will default to that, to the freeform one. And let's go ahead and see what it looks like. So now when this runs, as it goes and looks at the default, it says it's list customers. And you'll see, notice that it's created the card, and on the card it's put their first name, but each card works fine. So this is a really cool way to do like, kind of scenarios, and you could filter and things like that. So that's the difference between the two in terms of what goes on there. So again, you could just switch. You could go into the list properties, change it in the layout section. I think, yeah, and change it just to freeform, and boom. Now it's freeform. You could edit it that way. But I wanted to introduce the multiple layouts because it's really a handy tool to allow you to add multiple layouts so that the user can say, oh, I want to see my stuff in Kanban. I want to see my stuff as a list. I want to see my stuff as a chart. And it's all in one control. So you don't have to have 3 or 4 different UXs doing these things. Very powerful, very straightforward.
Very cool. So we have 2 questions here, and I think we can handle this last one in 9 minutes, just because I
Give it a
know
try.
the speed at which you operate is just amazing.
I'll talk really
You're
fast.
like the Flash. This person would just kind of like a quick overview of what it takes to build a REST API interface in Alpha Anywhere that can be consumed by some other third-party service. So in other words, something
Cool.
hanging out on the internet waiting for your REST call, Alpha does something and gives you back an answer.
Okay, so is it consuming or is it
It is
creating a REST service?
it's I guess publishing it because the third party will be consuming it.
Okay, cool. So built into Alpha is the web services capability here. And that's over here on the left-hand side called web services. Now, very important, basically a web service is, think of it as a catcher. It's sitting there waiting for someone to call it. And the reality is underneath it, it's just a special type of web page, really. We used to do it with A5W pages where you'd create an A5W page. It didn't actually render anything, but it would listen to the incoming request, run some scripts, and then send some information back. So, but you had to do a lot of the work yourself. You don't have to do that now. So a web service is what you're going to use to create that. Now, very important, a web service is a wrapper around a Xbasic class. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to go ahead and create an Xbasic class. I'll see if I can do this pretty quickly. So I'll go in here and I'm going to go ahead and insert a class definition for a REST API. And there I've got it. So I'm going to call this webinar and I'm going to call it simple class. So you have to create basically this. And what you're doing here is you create a function in here. And in that function, you can then call the database to whoever you want. And then you return the information back as JSON for them to consume. It could be XML also. You're not limited to that. But REST is more JSON centric these days here. Now, very important is when I created this class, you'll notice that it created this thing called a status, because the way a web API works is that you make the call to it, the call comes back to you, and they have standard statuses. 200 means A-okay, everything worked great. 401, no, something went wrong. So there's these standard kind of flags that you send or statuses that you tell people from there. So once you have built your class, so your class will be what you're going to expose. And what's interesting is you could have more than one function. I could go in here and say, okay, there's method 2 and 3 and 4 and things like that, delivering different information here. Once I've created this class and I'm happy with it, now I can go into my web projects control panel, go to web services, and I can create a new one. So we have different options here. I'm going to create either a SOAP interface, that's a traditional WSLD. We still support this, but this is really consuming a SOAP interface. We also have REST, create a new one to consume it or create a REST. This is what we're going to do here. Plus, we haven't covered, we're way behind on this, but the new GraphQL, which is like, think of it as a REST API on steroids. It's very popular, being used a lot by Facebook and other companies like that. So I'm going to click here on create new definition. So one, we actually have a built-in capability where you can just point at the database and it'll create a REST service around your database, which is a really great way because then you can just delete the stuff you don't want. You control what you can be doing because often you're just wrapping a database. But I'm going to do one where I've started with my empty service. So I'm going to add my class, which is my new webinar simple class. You'll notice that it looked at it and said, oh, guess what? You have 2 different functions. They're both red. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the first one. I'm going to expose that. I'm doing this really quickly, but git and Now I've exposed that for that service right here. So, and beyond the scope today, you can create authentication, auditing, and other stuff like that. So basically, first thing I did was created my class so that I like did my thing to provide the data. So incoming, they might ask for a customer name. I'm going to call the database. I'm going to look up that information. Then I'm going to hand them back the customer information. And during that process, I might require them to give me some authentication data so that I know they aren't someone there's someone that should allow to do it. But now I've created that, I can go ahead and just live test this thing. And all you're doing is thinking of creating a wrapper. In a moment, this will generate a sample page and launch it for me. And it uses something called Swagger, Open API 3.0. It's a standard way of documenting APIs. Really handy here. Generates this page for us. So ignore this, but the real heart of it is the last part of it, which is there. But this is just the temporary location for all this stuff. In a moment, it will launch this and show me the page. Okay, so you notice here's my endpoint. If you look here, I didn't think I called. Did I save that? I didn't save it. That way it doesn't have a good name. Let me go ahead and save it real quick, and I'll go ahead and click save, and we'll call this webinar. That way it looks nicer. Okay, we'll do live test it because now look at it. You notice it added the little name in there. So we'll go in here, and you'll see this will regenerate this in a moment. Okay. There we go. So you can see there is my webinar.a5 service. Here is my method here, and I can try it out actually in here. Execute it, calls the code, and then here's what comes back from that Xbasic class. So the cool thing now is I can take basically this right here, this webinar.a5 service, put that up on my server, Alpha Cloud, and then if someone hits that endpoint, i.e. calls it, server XYZ / webinar.a5 service, that code, that Xbasic class will run and it will return what comes into it. But remember, we can pass parameters in to actually give instruction to that web service. So again, you can create a web service where it just wraps your database. That's all automatic. Good starting point. But you can also create your own Xbasic class, wrap it as a web service, put it up on your, and that's really powerful because you may have a lot of internal logic and other things like that you've already created in your application that you want to expose to the outside world. Like here's an example is maybe I have this really cool formula for calculating the price of oil after something. And so now you could wrap that code that you use to generate that algorithm for that oil, wrap it as a API. So you don't necessarily have to give people a user interface. They can just be hitting that API. And more people are going to where any functionality is basically wrapped in an API and the user interfaces are built on top of that API. It's kind of where the industry is going. They're not really direct database calls are kind of going away just because there's a lot of security issues. It's not as flexible. So this gives you an example is you could actually wrap that database, wrap that logic in a class, then expose it through these automated building tools, and you're good to go. This is also really handy. We had a question a while back of people who needed to run regular processes. Well, what you can do, which is kind of cool, is you could wrap this, you could create that regular process as a script, wrap it, publish it as a web service on your server, and then you could literally have something like Zapier or the Windows Task Manager calling that web service periodically that would generate or do the task you need to it. The only caution on that is that there are certain time limitations. It's usually about 30 seconds or so. So if you have this super long running task, you really can't do it. But if you have something that's going to take a couple seconds, this is a great way to do that. Plus you can embed security in it. So not everybody can call that endpoint. So you can protect that code, that process, and then when you call it, you make sure to give it that secret code and it'll run properly. So I hope that's a quick introduction to it. It's a really powerful capability, and I'm using it more and more because it's so effective. You can stand up an API, give it to people, and then they can hit it.
That's fantastic. Well, Dion, thank you very much for all of that.
Thank you.
We are out of time. Thanks everyone who showed up and asked questions. If you have further questions, go ahead and send them to guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com. If not, we hope to see you at our next Wednesday webinar. Take care and stay well. Bye-bye.